Hello and welcome to today's webinar session. This is Jyoti Dodia and today is the 76th webinar in the Power Virtual User Group series. I hope that you've all subscribed to that, and if you haven't, just send me an email, jyoti_dodia@uk.ibm.com. I'm really pleased to have Tom Watts with us covering IBM Cloud Private today, and Tom is going to take us through what it is and how you could get started. So without further ado, Tom, if you could introduce yourself and then fire away.
Thank you, Jyoti. Hello, everybody. My name is Tom Watts. I come from the Lab Services team in the UK for IBM, and today I would like to talk through some of the experiences with Cloud Private and demonstrate a little bit of work with it with a microservice and a database deployment. I will be going through an introduction to it with a bit of slideware and then talk through some of the parts of the installation routine, and then I will dive into showing a Cloud Private console to do some proper work.
Sorry to interrupt you, Tom, but could you either speak up or turn your volume up for your mic?
Is that any better?
Little. If you're able to do more, then that would be great.
Okay, bear with me.
And whilst Tom is doing that, just a reminder that today's session is being recorded, and I will be sharing the replay as well as the slides with you afterwards. So that's fine, and that's great, Tom. People can hear you better now.
Thank you. Can you hear me better?
Yes, thank you. Carry on.
Okay, I shall carry on. So I shall dive in, just a tiny bit of slideware, I promise. So Cloud Private, the parts of the Cloud Private solution really show from the top down, where we've got open source and IBM middleware that can be run and deployed by people, teams in an organization, and that sits on top of the various open source products that control management, security, and the integration layers running through containers and other low-level applications on top of the operating systems. We can connect to via APIs to various other systems through OpenStack. We can talk to infrastructure through Nutanix and Power VM and others, as well as talk to applications through APIs external to the Cloud Private solution through SAP and others. What we can see is on this slide is at the bottom of the screen we have got the infrastructure layer. As you can see, there's Power AI mentioned there, so various scale-out machines. We can connect to that through a microservice or an API call in an application in the cloud to then run some work and then pull back the results. We can use it to talk to existing enterprise systems with Power VM running off top of with Linux, AIX, and IBM I, as well as already mentioned Nutanix clusters. It all gets managed through a central console, so I'll be showing that in a little while, where we can manage a catalog of applications, which are various descriptions, should we say, to be create services, application connections, that sort of thing, and then at the top of the stack, as you can see, the various different applications and where they come from. So expanding a little bit on what we can put into this Cloud Private catalog, we can have our traditional applications, as mentioned, that run inside virtual machines. They can be AIX, IBM I, or Linux VM-based applications. They can be connected into the catalog, where the catalog then sees and is told how to talk to these applications through various means. And then you can then have these containerized apps underneath, which also run their own cloud native, in our parlance, applications. These can all be then get managed on top of existing infrastructure. And as we like to do, an example where we have Nutanix at the bottom of the screen holds onto all the information about infrastructure and the VMs. We don't have to worry about any of the hardware. We have containers that run on these virtual machines. Cloud Private worries about those, and then we have our applications as discussed on top. So as far as editions are concerned, we have the Community Edition. You're all free to go and try that and practice and play with these things. There's a newer bundle which will be available today and through other means very soon, which comes with various entitlement on top of the Community Edition. That's listed on the screen. We have the Cloud Native Edition, where we have the IBM software stack on top for doing things like the microservices builder, the WebSphere Liberty stack, so we have all of the IBM side of things, and access to the Cloud Automation Manager, which I will be speaking about as well shortly. The enterprise level adds in extra IBM middleware, the MQ, the API Connect Professional, all these things which add value. And like I said, you can go and try it for free. There's a short web link on the screen, part of the slideware, where you can go on and try it out for yourself. So diving into a bit of this, the Cloud Private part is Kubernetes. It connects and talks to the Docker container systems, and then has the middleware on top to provide us with a common console. This stack of software to make the cloud area runs on an Intel system, a Power Linux system, and as a worker node only on Linux One, the Z Linux stack. So this is all about just the frameworks that make Cloud Private work rather than the applications necessarily. As I said, that can all be run externally as well and connected to via Cloud Private. The reason for Cloud Private's being is more of an evolution of what was called Boomix Local and the container system, which is still available, the Spectrum conductor for containers to run purely the container environment. This is the next level up, bringing these together to allow us to manage it in one place. The components that underpin this, as we've already said, Kubernetes. There's a common service element in the middle for our DevOps and integration with encryption keys, the microservices builder, logging of all this activity, identity and access control, auditing, all that stuff all sits there as common services. And then depending on the additions, you may well get the middleware, the data analytics services, all that stuff we've already mentioned. And extending to that will be extensions to talk via APIs to different programming environments, different cloud environments as well. So the Kubernetes architecture underneath it forms what I said is the ICP environment. We have the various boot nodes, the master, the worker, and the proxies. The boot node is purely used to install and set up and further install different worker nodes, as well as the actual master and everything else nodes. The master node, there'll be one or more if you've got high availability options to control and provide all of the components we've previously mentioned. And the worker nodes are the ones that actually run all the containers and do the work. The proxy node is an optional and is recommended with high availability options, so that handles the ingress of connections from people logging in into the network internal to the ICP environment, the Cloud Private environment. So you would connect and be provided, depending on the application that you deploy or work on, via a proxy node, which never changes. Behind the scenes, the work can happen elsewhere. So some of the concepts that we'll see in the Cloud Private setup will be containers which are then grouped together in pods. So there'll be common elements and common connectivity between certain containers, and they'll live together as a pod, like a dependency group almost, but they also then get located together on the same worker node or the same cluster, depending on what you're running. Volumes, we'll very briefly touch on that in a little while. It's essentially a shared directory which can then be accessible to a container. Services, these are the sets of these pods that we mentioned, and that will have a service on top that will provide access to it, IP addresses, DNS, and all that sort of stuff for those containers. Replicator sets, they are collections of pods that are then replicated around the worker nodes, so you can have a number of them running at a time. Provides high availability, also provided for load balancing as well. So if you're familiar with the way WebSphere does some of its load balancing, for example, you'll come in through the proxy addresses, and then whoever in a replica set can answer the quickest or in a defined parameter will answer and do the work. So that provides some level of load balancing on a cluster. It also is one way of scaling large numbers of containers to scale out your application in this local cloud. You've got labels and stateful sets. Labels are quite common. We'll see those in operation where we actually assign a name for a service to a particular, for want of a better word, an environment variable that is used by a service to provide connectivity or configuration information to a pod or container. Stateful sets, it's about how we order and load up and connect to various pods. Feel free, if at any point anyone's getting confused about what I'm saying, to jump in and ask questions.
Now's a good time to just tell people that they can type in any questions into the chat window. So if you can't see the chat window, if you click on the chat icon at the top of your WebEx screen, it will open up the chat box. So type in any questions or comments or suggestions that you have, and I'll keep monitoring. So please send to everyone rather than to me privately or to Tom privately, and then we'll handle them. There's nothing at the moment, Tom. Oh, sorry, there is one question which says, I can't understand a pod. Do you want to just...
Oh, a pod. Yeah. So a pod is a collection of containers. So a container would be a self-contained environment running an application or some scripts or some Java, whatever is the job at hand that needs to be deployed. Development environments, for example. A pod groups a number of containers together. So there may be some dependencies. You'll see as we go through the demonstration that, for example, we are reliant on a MariaDB instance, and we'll have a separate WordPress application in this case. They will be connected together in a pod, so that when we start up a pod, that the various containers start up together, a way of controlling all the end-to-end elements. So pod will come up. I'll show you that on the cloud console when we get there in a second.
Thank you. A follow-on question to that is WLPAR on AIX defined as a container then?
No, it's not.
Okay.
That's the short answer. If there's an application that runs within a WPAR that we can get to via a network connection, then we can then access that application via various APIs, but we wouldn't, or it doesn't, should I say more clearly, understand or deal with WPARs.
Okay, there's another one that's come to me privately. A reminder, if you could, if anyone wants to ask a question, please send to everyone rather than just the host. So the question is, how do we order the ICP product and what planning is needed for a successful sale?
Good question. I shall happily answer that at the end of the demonstration with some information.
Great. Please bear with us. Thank you. No more for the moment, Tom. Carry on.
Thank you. Okay. Now for the wizardry. Let's connect. And hopefully, the Cloud Private console will have appeared.
Oh, yes, I can see your console.
Excellent. Okay, so we've got a console there. I'm just going to briefly press the right button. Let me see if we can make that a bit bigger. talk through about the installation first, because showing the installation is rather dull. I'm just going to point out a few things from the installation manual so that people are aware of the starting point before we go on to a running Cloud Private console, if that's okay. So during the installation routine, there's various commands that need to be run to actually deploy the software itself. Suffice to say, setting up the installation environment is quite important. The best way to tackle this is to make sure that you have your instance VM running Linux, whether it's Intel or on Power, for the master and boot nodes, including the mainframe version on Z Linux. Make sure that the Linux image that's installed and set up is a clean one, not a reused one. So what I mean by that is either installed manually, so it's a default install with only the necessary additional packages added, or a clean deployment from a Power VC environment or equivalent. So it's a blank image, effectively, just running Linux and the necessaries for running on your particular network. Anything else can cause issues. A lot of the work in the installation is done automatically, but it's actually coordinated using Terraform and through Kubernetes and Docker commands. So anything that upsets any of that along the way can cause trouble. The biggest area for trouble would be the networking. So the networking right, and that includes making sure if you're using DNS that's all resolvable forward and backward without any issue. Proxy setups, if you're using proxy servers so it can get out to the internet to download external containers that are available. That requires extra work as well, which with the materials supplied after this, there will be a list of what you need to do for proxying. So getting those environments right first is the important bit. After that, it is really a case of downloading, in the case of the Enterprise Edition, a compressed tarball, whether it's the Intel or the Power environment version, extracting this and loading things into Docker. So Docker will normally, through Red Hat, Ubuntu, you can just install Docker from the command line through its own repositories. There are requirements for particular versions of Docker. The best thing to do is to go to Docker's website and you can download and install for the necessary environments using RPM packages, dev packages, or through source, the current supported version of Docker, which is 17.09. So there is that version available from the Docker website. That's important. Okay. I think there might have been a question that popped up there, Jyoti.
Yes, there is. Is there any role of StatD image in this?
At the moment, I'll have to answer no to that, but it's something I will double check for you.
Okay. Any questions that we haven't been able to answer, we'll try and put some information out there on the wiki when we post the replay. So please do keep those questions coming in. So carry on, Tom. I think that's it for now.
Okay. So there's a place to store configuration files. It's suggested in the manual here to put them in a different place. Just make sure they're backed up. And then literally to set up the foundation part, so before we log in, it is running a single command, which I shall highlight slightly here. So that's all one command rather than broken up, which accepts the license agreement for the Enterprise Edition and then deploys from the Docker image repository, which is now local, because we've loaded it in, the various containers and sets up internal networking to run our Cloud Private image. After that command has run successfully, which normally takes between 25 and 35 minutes, depending on the environment to run, you're then ready to go. When you're deploying, there is two files that need to be really, not three files in this case, that you need to be really careful of. The config.yaml file, which allows us to modify parameters before deploy, So things like the cluster name and any special networking requirements, any IP address ranges you want to use for the logging into the cluster, proxy IP addresses if you're using a proxy, for example, need to be defined in there. Then you have a hosts file, which is its own host file, its own format, which says the IP address and the name of each type of node you are going to initially deploy. So there are 3 areas. One will say the master, and then you give it a name and an IP address. There'll be one for proxy, if you want to use a proxy, and then you give it a name and its IP address, and then there'll be one that says workers, and then that'll be a list of all the worker nodes. Now you can, after the installation and deployment, add more worker nodes if you wish, using a slightly modified version of the install command, which just then plugs in the extra worker nodes into your ICP environment. SSH keys. Now the SSH is quite important. When it's doing the install, it will talk to all of these nodes we've defined in the host file over SSH. So you want to make sure that SSH keys are set up and shared to all the nodes we're going to install from our root node, which will become the master node. There is instructions to do that if you don't know how to do that. Once that has been performed and you've customized the information and run the deploy command, at the end we'll get a message saying, and I shall highlight the message, if it's successful, we'll get an IP address and a port number to connect to, and then the default settings of admin and admin to log in. Unless you've changed it, of course, in the config.yaml file.
So tell me,
no questions?
Yes, there are. So it's all about what it's supported on. So is it compatible with all Linux distributions is one of the questions, and then the other one was, can it be installed on IBM I or AIX?
Okay, all right. So we'll start with the operating system one then. So IBM I and AIX, no, you can't install the frameworks onto those. We can only access and use the applications on those environments. So it requires Linux, whether that's on an Intel or Power system. Is it compatible with all Linux distributions? It is compatible with Red Hat 7 environments and Ubuntu supported on Power environments. So that's the LTS release is Ubuntu 16.4. In theory, you could run it on a Debian or a Red Hat base like CentOS environment, and it should work. However, we don't provide support for that. It's only on the Ubuntu and Red Hat environments. I have not tested this on any SLA's SUSE environment, so I can't answer that. But as far as the official line is concerned, it's Red Hat and Ubuntu. Comment there about Docker. Yes, Docker is compatible with any distribution. It's to do with the installation and additional products on top that run. Like I said, there's no burning reason I can think of straight away why it shouldn't run on any distribution. It's all about what is supported and tested from an IBM standpoint. I shall pause temporarily.
Thanks, Tom. I think that's it for the minute. Oh,
Okay.
There's another one popped up, sorry. From where can we get the S390X image, GitHub or other place?
Right, yes. So that's for the worker nodes only, for the S390X image. There is a GitHub image you can download. I haven't tried it, but I believe it's on GitHub. If you've got the Enterprise Edition, then there will be another place to download the code from, I believe Passport Advantage website or whatever it's called now, as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Move on.
Excellent. So now we've got a successful working login. I shall now move to a real world Cloud Private setup. So in the true fashion, here's one I made earlier. So we'll do a quick tour around the GUI and then we'll dig into actually doing a couple of things just so you can see some of the workflow and how to make it happen. So this is the main dashboard. You can see it okay. There basically highlights all the nodes in the cluster and if they're okay, active or inactive. any shared storage, so that'll be NFS shared, any host-based storage, so any individual node that's holding some storage and made available, or a cluster file system, for example, that'll show up here. At the moment it's saying no % available, we haven't made anything yet, so whatever's there already is already in use with other containers. Deployment, so this is all the containers, or pods, and its containers. So at the moment we've got 18 deployed. You will have a number of these by default when you do the first install. Then as you deploy your own work, that will increase. Luckily this one's been deployed cleanly today and showing all 18 are okay and there are no problems. And as you start stressing out and using your environment more, you will see the resource overview, pretty high level, chasing memory utilization, CPU. This is across the entire cluster, not just individual nodes. And if we're connected into some nodes that are running GPU intensive work, we've also got an area here that shows GPU percentage. So that's the dashboard. We have a menu on the side here. Click on the menu. We have our catalogs and workloads and stuff. I'm going to actually work from the platform area first. So looking at the platform, we can see various categories. The important thing to start with is nodes. What we'll see here is we've got our nodes with the name, which is an IP address, and then its role. This one is particularly running proxy management and master, so it's all running together on one node, and it's schedulable. If we click on it, we can then get some more details, which is a lot of more tiny writing and a bit more information about what's running on there. If we scroll down a bit, we can see our pods. So pods here, we've got namespaces, so which area in the name, when the cluster it's running, is it running or is it started and succeeded, IP addresses, that sort of information. And if we want to find out information about these, if we click on one of these pods, you'll see the IP address internally where it's accessible, was it working, and any particular specific UUIDs which can be used from the command line, for example. We want to see what containers are part of this pod. In this case, we've only got the one. So it's terminated because this actually does a job when we start up ICP. We can see in the events for the pod, nothing there. And then logs should come back and say whether it started, stopped. As it's empty, nothing's happened. And then back through the trail to nodes. As you add more worker nodes, they will appear here. Look at networking, it will say no network policies in place. So in a cluster, we create a network policy that hides away different groups of people, different types of work, so that they're running across the cluster, different IP addresses, different VLANs, that sort of idea. Storage. So here we have a list of what we call persistent volumes. And these volumes that are listed are actually local to the management server at the moment. We will create one which will live on a worker node shortly. And then we can look at, as it says here, local volume, it's bound, which means it's connected to a pod. And how big is it? 2 gigabytes. And a reclaim policy, once it's not bound anymore, it gets deleted. So it can clear itself up. Persistent volume claim. So this is showing us who, in the form of the application stroke pod, has claimed and then named which one. As you can see here, we had 3 earlier. These have all been claimed by the various pods. Go to configuration, scaling policies. We don't have a scaling policy, but we can create one. And this is going to be quite common. You'll see this throughout. When we define these, we will see essentially what are the labels, so a name and namespace. Different namespaces exist. You saw the cube system one, don't use that. We can define our own. The default is a namespace separate from the main system. Scale target, do we want to target hundreds of nodes or only a few? Number of replications. I mentioned replication sets earlier, so we can have a minimum of, say, 2 or 3 that sits across the 3 different nodes. But maximum, we could have, say, 10 or 12 or more. across the nodes available. So this represents our minimum and maximum scaling targets. Any particular CPU types, if we want to target that as well to scale CPU usage. I won't define them here, but that's where we can create one policy.
So there was a question that came up, Tom, which is, can we add one node, i.e. a VM, and check all the policies, network storage, configuration, for better understanding?
I can't on this system. I'd love to. On this particular machine that I'm using, I can't do that. Okay. I'm not to. But in the near future, I will have a setup which will allow me to do that. So I hope to revisit that.
Okay, well, we can, so I think we talked about this yesterday, didn't we, that maybe you'll be able to create some mini demos, videos, and then we can look into that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
Thanks for the question. Network access services. Now this is an important area to so all services, whether that be a pod, whether that be particular application within a container that's broadcast out something like a WordPress system, will have a service. So all of these on the screen listed have a service of a name, so it has a particular name, and then it'll say what type is it, and this particular type, I shall highlight, is a cluster IP. So that IP is assigned inside the cluster of all the containers, not externally to a node. And then it'll say app and the name. So this is a label, app. So we've got a name called app, and then it links to a specific pod name. So it binds the pod name to this service. And the IP address is then populated automatically, and then it says what port or port range is then deemed to be this service. So we can then have other applications and pods talk to this service through the IP address, and it will be mapped to the appropriate port into a container. If it was a node port, it would be a direct correlation between the application out to the real world via a proxy. We'll show you that in operation shortly. So workloads, a lot of the work will happen from the catalog, and we'll come back to workloads. So the catalog itself is mentioned at the beginning, where we have our list of available deployed services or applications. There will be a lot by default, most of them will be IBM ones. You can add your own to the catalog, and you can also connect in through the configuration interface your various different applications on IBM, for example. In this case, we are going to, as I scroll down, you'll see various ones here, integration bus, that will roll out, and MariaDB is the one we're going to use. There are other databases, there's some netcall endpoints and probes, Nginx, so we can deploy our own Nginx services, which can then be told to scale using a scale policy, so it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to host our own wonderful web services. Brilliant for our DevOps environments, of course. And we have Open Liberty, so the Java microservices. The list goes on. There's Power AI, for example. So it's enabled various stuff to be downloaded from either the local Docker image repository or from defined internet or external repository. Okay. So back to the dashboard. So all good. Hopefully everyone's happy with this. Okay, we've got a question. Is there any difference between IBM Cloud Private and Ansible? Yes, Ansible has specific jobs to do with comes to deployments and setup and things like that. Cloud Private is very much a much bigger management platform than Ansible. So really, if you just want to use Ansible with Terraform or Salt or something, you can do that. It doesn't do, that together won't do a lot of what Cloud Private does at the management layer on top. So we're trying to make this a much more seamless experience compared to configuring Ansible and your Terraform scripts and things like that yourselves. Any more questions?
Not at this moment.
No. Okay. So I'm now just going to switch off some sharing.
Oh, another question came in, Tom, whilst you were doing that.
Okay.
By installing Power AI container, you would need compatible NVIDIA drivers versions between the container and the host OS. So it's not a question, it's a comment.
Yes, you would. Yes, with Power AI, having dabbled with it a few times myself on some various setups, yes, getting the right NVIDIA drivers installed and operational is probably one of the most important parts. Once you've got that sorted on Power AI, of course, you can run tests, do your own scripts, load up some various data sets, things like that, and see if it's all working fine. That does tend to be a very important point, and yes, that is vital. So thanks for bringing that up. So hopefully what I'm going to do now is to find our first part. We're going to create a persistent volume, and I'm going to need to define a host path, in this case, in this particular setup. So I'm going to just go into here, and we're going to create a directory that can be seen. So bear with while I type various commands. I'm just going to create a nice directory where we're going to store our MariaDB. And that's it for that. And now we've defined that folder, we're going to make that a persistent volume, ready to be claimed. So we need to, oops, apologies. I'm going to make sure that I get this all perfectly good. We're going to call it MariaDB. To make it 1 gigabyte. I'm going to scroll on a bit, and we're going to make it a host path. I must add, I'm going to call it host path. Where I've defined that directory is actually on an NFS mount, but I'm going to make this a bit easier. I think we should set the reclaim policy to recycle, so once it's been used and the application is no longer there, then that persistent volume will then become available to be reclaimed rather than deleted. So what we've done here is giving it a volume name, capacity, read write once, that's the default access mode, we need to leave it at that, recycle and set a host path. Now I've set it a host path, I need to actually add a label and say where it is. So the label is going to be path, and I'm going to make sure that I set the right one, so the one we've just created. So that's just telling us where to put it, and then we're going to hit create. Ooh, and here we go. I think I've got the wrong host path. Just love it. Did I mistype it?
While you're looking into that, Tom.
Thank you. Apologies for this.
That's okay. While you're looking into that, Tom, I'll just remind people that they can type in questions into the chat window. There are a couple more questions that come up, which we will handle soon. Don't worry. And this webinar is being recorded, and a replay will be available later. If you've not subscribe to the Power of Virtual User Group webinar series, if you're not receiving emails from me directly, then kindly send me an email. Type in my email ID into the chat window, and that means that you can then subscribe to the webinar series, and I will send you details of that as soon as I'm able after this webinar. And we'll keep you informed of future sessions and also replays and sometimes local education events. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, my mistake, I should have put it under parameters, not label. So that's my mistake. But on the screen now, you should see that it's created there, MariaDB named, host path 1 GB, and the status is available. It hasn't been claimed yet. So that'll come in a minute. So a couple of questions. So with ICP, we only talk about containers. At a fundamental level, yes, we only talk about containers, but it is more than that. We also talk about primarily the applications, the cloud-native applications on top. Containers hold all the environments that make things work. When we're talking about publishing applications or connecting to others, we talk about the APIs or the service itself. Can I share links of the IBM Techno? We talk about Docker installation on x86 image. Yes, that will be part of the information supplied at the end. So that's already there.
Thank you. Questions? No, nothing to me directly. No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so to find a directory in this case, we've got our persistent volume ready to go, and we can check that's available. So what we need to do now is publish our MariaDB from our catalog. So it is important to note, when you do this at this level rather than through automation, which I'll come to, you do need to make sure you've got some storage or a persistent volume defined somewhere, which can then be acted on. If you don't do that first, you'll find that deploying things, it'll error saying I've got nowhere to grab storage from, nowhere to claim from. So on the screen here, where the hand pointer is, there's the IBM Cloud Automation Manager. There's two of them here. There's that one, and there's one which is a production-ready one. These do much more automation of the things, the tasks that I'm currently doing, so we can deploy entire environments across the cluster using one click or one parameter, and off it goes. So installing these onto the system and start to use them is a good thing. In this environment, it hasn't been deployed, but in the near future, I will be demonstrating that as part of the things I'm going to do in a few weeks' time. So in this particular environment, I want to deploy a MariaDB one, so I shall click on the MariaDB dev, and it'll have an introduction, prerequisites. It'll say here, most of these prerequisites, you must have some storage, which we've already done. We can install it using a command line, using a Helm command line, and it shows you a command to use if you like, and a command line if you would like to delete. But what we're going to do is press configure at the bottom and do it through here. So on this screen, this is where we'll define some parameters that we want to have. So we're going to give it a release name for WordPress, sorry, my apologies. So this MariaDB is going to be used specifically for MariaDB and WordPress. We're going to target our namespace here so we can actually target where we want to go. We'll leave it at default. I have read license agreements, if there are any. And then we'll come on to scheduling. At this point, this is where you start to see differences between different processor environments. So as we're targeting a worker node, we'll now see three scheduling options, one for Intel 64-bit or AMD 64 as it's called here. We've got another one for PowerPC or power environments. We need to change this because we want to say it's most preferred. We'd rather it go to power than anywhere else in this set up. If you have mainframe worker nodes and you would rather it all go there, you can set that to most preferred. So this is where we can define where we prefer it all to go. In this case, we're just going to say most power. And then we'll see Docker image configuration. We don't want to change these. It's saying the Docker repository is actually coming from an IBM repository, and the version number is already filled in, and Docker image pull policy. So in other words, if it's not already in our local repository, go off and find it. And that's what it will do in this case. Hopefully, I'm not going too quick.
No, I can see the screens that as you're going through, so that's fine.
What we're going to do is dynamic provisioning participant volume. That allows us to go and grab one. So I'm going to say this is going to be our MariaDB claim. So when we go back to the storage view later on, we'll see that name, MariaDB-claim, will then be linked to our 1 gigabyte host path. So scroll down a bit. Size of the claim. We want it to be 1 gigabyte, so I'm going to define that as 1 gigabyte. That's all we're going to fill in there. Well, I'm not going to touch resource configuration, so I'm not going to change memory, CPU limits. I just want to have that as previously defined. Then we come on to our service configuration, and this is where we pick our node and cluster ports. Excuse me a second.
Tom will be back in a moment.
Sorry, bit of a dry throat, I apologise.
That's okay.
So, service name is MariaDB, we're going to set it to cluster. Service port will leave as default. MariaDB itself, we're going to give it an admin. Password of admin. Database name. Let's call it WordPress. And then we'll hit install. At this point, hopefully it'll say installation complete, which it does. We can now watch the release or return to the catalog here. What it's actually doing is going off to download it. It'll say deployed in status. We click on the name here. Say current version available. It's got its namespace defined now, which we'll use in a little while. And we can see in our persistent volume claim, it's actually claimed our MariaDB volume we defined earlier. So it has gone straight away to claim that space, storage space. As you'll see in deployment, which we'll click on in a second, you'll see we've got desired and current, say we've deployed these release. It's up to date, this release, but it's not yet available. And underneath that, you see the pod being built, and it's saying container creating, so it's off, going off and downloading and creating the container while I'm talking. At the bottom, it'll give you information or hints on if you're logged in from the command line, how you can get straight into the database and the various parameters you'll need if you're within the cluster. So if you're interested in doing that, you can do this using some instructions here. Let's have a look at deployment. Excuse me. I want to go to logs, nothing, any events. So it's currently creating still. It's defining a replica set. The moment you'll still see the strategy, there's rolling update strategy that's saying still not available, but it's currently deploying. Details down here, we can see various IP addresses that have automatically been assigned within the cluster. We didn't tell it this. And then the pod itself is saying it's pending. And that's because it's still downloading. So now, from the pod view, if I look at events, at the bottom there will say it's pulling the image still. It'll only take probably another 60 seconds or so to complete, hopefully. But you can also see through these events where it actually attached to that storage automatically. I didn't tell it where to find it. It claimed it for itself because it matched the required parameters. Now, at this point, you can see straight away, building these, a handful of these yourself is quite straightforward. When you've got lots of teams working on these cloud environments, this is where you'll need to set up your various scaling replica sets and network policies so that you can control all the resources that are being consumed in the cloud a bit better and make that more automated as well, so we don't have to worry about it too much. They just get what they're allowed to have and no more. That's still going. So you have to bear with it a second while it's still. And as soon as it's ready, we can do next.
Okay, while it's doing that, maybe I can just tell people a little bit about what's coming up next in the webinar series. So in August, on the 8th and 9th of August, we will have some Power 9 webinars coming to you, delivered by Nigel Griffiths, who's a well-known presenter on this webinar series. And Gareth Coates and Nigel Griffiths have both been working on some exciting Power 9 equipment, and we'll be telling you more about that in August. So watch this space. I've put some details up on the wiki page already, at least the dates and timings. So watch that space.
Excellent. So hopefully you see now that it has finished creating the container and has started it in the event log. If I go back to the pod overview, you'll see the status is now running. So that's created our MariaDB database with its passwords and the 1 GB area we previously defined. And if I go back to the deployment summary screen, you'll see our namespace is default here, and it's now showing as ready and available to use. So what we now want to do is actually create an application, or connect an application to that database to be used. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our own deployment. Sorry, press the right button there. So we're now going to define our own deployment, which will then connect to that database. So, like that. We're going to keep it in the same namespace. We're only going to have one replica set because I haven't got a big enough cluster here. But this is where you can then increase your number of replicas to keep the system running in high availability, or the application runs load balanced, however is suitable at the time. So this is where we want to define a label. I mentioned earlier about the app label. So we're going to define it here and call it WordPress. So this then defines the application. We can call upon the application by its label name within the cloud environment. So what we want to do is now download, or tell it where to download the container. So I want to define WordPress. It's going to be full if not present. We don't need to worry about the commands there. This is where we're now going to say I want to pull the right image. So this is just saying download the Power Environment version of the image. It's going to be WordPress, and I want the latest version. So this is just defining deployment. You'll see it's here. Now appears there on the screen. So now it's gone off and doing its thing. Hopefully. That'll download in the background, as did the previous version.
If anyone has any questions, please type them into the chat window.
There we go. So start a container there. So that's our initial deployment created there. So now what we want to do is create a way in. So basically define one of our network services. So back to this service screen we saw earlier that I talked about. And we're going to create a service. And we're going to call it WordPress. Receive service. It's going to be in the default namespace. This time around though, we want to create a node port address. We want to talk directly in to the application itself. And now we're going to link it to our application via the label. And then this needs to define the ports. So for this one, it's just going to be the default HTTP port of 80. And then we need to tell it to select the app, WordPress. And press Great. So now we have our service defined, which we can see here. There's also now a link after the node port section, which allows us to then talk to the mapped port AC2 external port, which is 302600. So if I click on that now, that should take us to a new web page, and we should see WordPress's configuration. And there we go. So now I'm talking directly to the application that's running on the cloud. At the moment, it's not talking to anything else, so we need to do our initial configuration of WordPress, which won't take a second. So it's warning you here, we need to know information on the database. So we're going to define our database. WordPress. Actually, if you remember, we set it up as admin and admin. The database host now is the namespace of the MariaDB that we defined before. So that's the bit we clicked on the deployment. So I'm going to put that in there. So that will then link it directly to that database, which is available within the cluster. Hit submit. And it should say, yes, we can now communicate to the database. We run that installation. It's going to know some very basic information. We're just going to call it my name, yes. Okay. So this is just to get WordPress running. I'll go off and do it. It says success. So now if I log in with that name, that password, it'll take us to the administrative screen of WordPress, sorry. And as you can see, it's suddenly gone, I've got updates. So this is WordPress itself checking that it's got updates. But we'll just visit the site so far. And there it is, just a blank WordPress website talking to our cloud-enabled MariaDB environment. So that's it. We've now deployed a database. We have now got an application running. That's all running on top of the ICP environment. And we've looked through the containers and the pods and defining a service so we can connect to it. Any questions?
Excellent. Thanks, Tom. So there's one question, or not question, well, yes, it is a question. From a pre-sales perspective in the US, who can we work with at IBM to assist in creating the ICP solution? So I'm assuming that Don is from our channel, but I don't know. So perhaps, Don, if you can just send us your privately your contact details, then we can be in touch. But Tom, if you want to just address it as a who has the skills within IBM, does it sit with lab services or perhaps the client technical specialist, depending on what kind of requirement it is?
Yes. So if you need help with creating a solution which can then be used to assist with the sales or talk to your end customers, it would normally be a pre-sales request which would go to lab services, in this case in the US. The same applies here in the UK and other countries across Europe and Asia, of course. So normally you put a request in via a sales channel, which would then be passed to lab services, who you then can engage with to help you set up this environment. And there's a request on the TechNet how to build the image compatible for the container. That's actually in some of the some of the links that I'm providing at the end of the presentation slides. There are sections there on how to create your own images for containers, which you can then use to deploy. So that's answered in some of the web links.
Okay, so that will be in a slide that Tom will be showing soon, and we'll have the slide material available after today's webinar a little later on today. I'm hoping I'll make that available to everyone.
Okay, my pleasure. Just going back to the dashboard at the beginning again, I said the deployment numbers would increase when we're working. We've done 2 deploys, and as you can see, it now says 20. So the dashboard is telling the truth. The shared storage has gone up from 42 to 43 gigabytes to use. That's right, we've only allocated 1 gigabyte. CPU utilization has gone up a fraction because we're not doing a lot at the moment. Bit of memory utilization. So that's doing that now. So we can then look around wherever you like. We can look at deployments, and we can look at, as you can see now, WordPress is showing available. We can then redeploy it, create a new version of this, and just redeploy it, and attach the same MariaDB, or attach another one. As I said earlier, we can scale it up with our scale-out policy, things like that. So that's just a very, very high-level, simplified version of doing a deployment of a couple of applications who talk to each other and then provide a service to whoever wants it, really. And at this point, of course, said WordPress, in this particular example, we then just use it as we would normally do on the other setup out on the great internet, if you've got it, or in your own intranet. So if there's no further questions on that, that's sort of the end of me going through Cloud Private, the whistle-stop tour of the interface, and some of the terminology, and showing it doing a job. If there are any more questions, please do ask. Otherwise, I'll be putting some questions or answers together from some of the ones we've had to defer with Jyoti assistance.
Of course. So there was one question that I was going to ask, which is obviously today you've shown WordPress and MariaDB, but that was just an example.
Yes.
Do you have any other sort of common applications that are being used in this manner?
If I go back to the Helm charts a minute, just to show the ones that are provided by IBM, by the default install, there are a few. Primarily, as you can see, I mentioned the Cloud Automation Manager. That's the important one for automating a lot of what I've just done. The databases, I think, from what I've heard from people talking, they're looking more at setting up some of these smaller MongoDBs, things like that, and then customizing and testing on top. The Nginx one, the web server, and setting up a scale-out version of that to handle large loads, that's the one that people talk about as well. Others, particularly from a developer point of view, using this environment, like the Node.js sample application to show how you can define your own Node.js microservice, for want of a better phrase, that is used a lot. So those microservices use the scripting languages, talking over APIs through to IBM I, for example, which is doing a specific job, and then representing that back end through to a web front end and scale that connectivity. So multiples of these can run. The IBM I can then service those multiple connections, show different views. It's a way of scaling up and managing from the middle, so to speak, all of this stuff, and that's generally where it's starting to go.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't yet, personally, although I'm sure others have, dealt with the Power AI side of things.
Okay.
But connecting the two, I mean.
Right.
Possible.
Great, thank you. So I have a couple other questions that have come in. Rajneesh is saying, I saw brokerage services in menu, and he joined late. Does this give metering and billing services for IBM I images?
It can be connected to that, yes.
Okay.
So you'll do it over an API connection, and you can do that, yes. So metering and billing is built in for metering and billing of the Cloud Private side of things. I can't remember where it is. No, there's metering. Probably not a lot in here at the moment. We'll see what it loads up.
Yes, as Tom will have mentioned, this is a demo environment which kind of gets wiped after each use.
So this is showing us a connection directly into the metering system. So these are the, you'll see here as I'm clicking through the various, the two things we've deployed. This will also be with the brokerage Helm chart, as it's called, the recipe to set up this environment. You can use that to connect to an IBM I instance to then talk about metering and billing at that level as requested. So you can do that. As you can see, it's taking its time here, probably because not a lot been happening and it's only just been started. But yes, long-winded way of saying yes, you can.
Another question, I think when we were talking about what can be done, is the question came in saying, what about Tomcat?
What about what? Sorry, I didn't quite catch.
Tomcat.
Tomcat. I believe you can, yes. I haven't seen it in my list here. Let's have a look. No, it's not here. But you can add it in, yes.
Okay, I don't see any other questions at the moment. So.
No.
Oh, another one. Can we get access to this environment for testing?
Yes, you can.
So I think you had some details on a slide. Did you, or I thought?
Yes, bear with me. I shall now deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And show that on the screen. So I shall now show that. One, please hold. Okay. Okay. I've got the slide.
I can still see you. Okay, I can see your.
Can you see it now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, so here's a list of various places to learn more. You can try things, like I said earlier, there is a community edition for free. You can sign up and use it and try it out. There are some tutorials on YouTube on how to do specific tasks. There's Slack channels to go and talk to people about ICP. There are other videos detailing in more detail the various parts around ICP on Power. I'll be adding my own, of course, as we said earlier. Knowledge Center link is important. A lot of the information there is very, very useful. And like I said, there's other self-help areas and the Developer Works portal as well to get a hand with some microservices and other questions around that as well. So these will be available to you all. Okay. Any other questions?
Okay. No, the question was about how do we get access to the environment for testing, which you've answered via the community edition. user ID and password required to get to this environment?
That's defined when you set up your connection. You sign up and you'll get that access.
Okay. So yeah, go to the link. I've popped it into the chat window and it will be on the slides that I'll share. If you are subscribed to the webinar, the webinars, then you will automatically receive an email from me with the replay details as well as links to the slides. If you haven't, then just send me an email and I can add you. I'll put my email ID into the chat window.
Okay. I caught that time at 3:15. So hopefully we've answered enough questions, and as we said, we'll follow up with more later by email from the subscribed users. These slides will be made available, and there are access to the environments on the IBM Cloud, and you can try it out. If there's anything else, please do get in contact by email. My address is going to be provided on the slides, and there's a Twitter handle and all that exciting stuff as well to get hold of me. So,
okay.
Back to Jyoti, and thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Tom. I'm going to stop the recording there.